She would become one of the most successful horse dealers in the United States. The undisputed boss of Idaho's famed Diamond Ranch. The world would come to know her as the Horse Queen of Idaho. Friends and family simply called her Kitty.
Kitty's story is telling that it was possible for a woman in the late 19th century American West to do what she wanted, to be as successful as she wanted. And that's why Idahoans need to know about Kitty.
Kitty Wilkins was the daughter of ambitious, fortune-seeking pioneers. Her parents, Laura and J.R., met, married, and made their journey across the Oregon Trail in 1853. She was 17. He was 21. The Wilkins family wanderlust finally came to an end in southern Idaho, in an area known as the Valley of Tall Grass. Here, the Wilkins would launch their horse breeding dynasty.
The Wilkins Island horse range in southern Owyhee County was probably some of the best livestock range in the American West. It was called an island because it was a high plateau sandwiched between deep canyons, and so it was a natural corral on that Wilkins Island range.
A handmade rock wall is a ghostly reminder of the Wilkins Empire. The wall and Idaho's desert cliffs held the growing herd together. It may be hard to imagine the relationship between humans and horses 150 years ago. Horses provided daily transportation. They took men into battle, helped feed nations, delivered goods and services. They were essential to the economy and everyday life. Kitty absolutely adored them. She called them the most beautiful animal ever created.
A horse comes about as near being human as any of the animals, I think. I am passionately fond of a good and beautiful horse. Kitty Wilkins.
She was also becoming very adept at judging a good horse as she accompanied her father on horse-dealing trips.
He found out that I knew almost as much about the business as he did. I was always independent. I induced him to let me do the selling around the country. Oh, they tell me I'm a pretty shrewd judge of the value of a horse.
In her late 20s, Kitty took over the Wilkins horse operations, while her father and brother John focused on cattle. Kitty bred her horses using bloodstock stallions and let the herd run wild from winter through summer. Breeding in the wide-open range of southwestern Idaho produced a kind of super horse. Alkaline soil built sturdy, sure-footed bones. And the elevation of the range, upwards of 6,000 feet, increased lung capacity and endurance. In the fall, some 40 buckaroos drove the herd 75 miles to Mountain Home, where they were loaded on trains destined for stockyards across the nation. In the stockyards of Chicago, Omaha, Sioux City, and St. Louis, Kitty was astonishing. Perhaps with memories of her mother, the only woman among men in the early pioneer days, Kitty confidently handled the sale of her horses among a huge crowd of men.
Sometimes people come out to the stockyards to see in me a new curiosity, and there are a few who try to flirt or make sport of me. I just walk up to a group of such men and, looking them squarely in the face, say, "Do you gentlemen wish to look at my horses?"
It's easy to imagine her thinking of herself as a thoroughbred. I am the best. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm going to do. I can run with the big boys. And so that's what she does.
Her unique place in a man's world drew the attention of the press. The San Francisco Examiner was the first to coin the title Horse Queen of Idaho.
In the early years, they were fascinated by her success. She was enterprising. She claimed that this is one of the things that set the American Westerner apart was the spirit of enterprise.
Still, reporters couldn't resist first commenting on her beauty.
Miss Wilkins is tall, lithe, and graceful in physique. She is a decided blonde with clear cut and expressive features.
And then her business savvy.
There appears to be no department of the horse raising business that she does not thoroughly understand.
At its height, the Wilkins Ranch was home to 10,000 horses, all marked with the famous diamond brand. Kitty understood the power of branding.
The whole idea behind stamping your brand on something comes from, taking a piece of metal and burning it into the flesh of an animal. You show to the world that's who you are with a simple visual image. And that's what Kitty Wilkins tried to do, I think, by giving herself as the simple visual image of what her brand was.
Buyers simply saw the quality of her product. The United States Cavalry was a huge market for Kitty's horses. Other horses were purchased to power farms or provide transportation. Some of her premier horses and expert buckaroos joined Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. Kitty's finest horses were coveted symbols of prestige for famous men, even presidential hopefuls.
And I do not want to buy until I know something more of your horses. This is from William Jennings Bryan himself with his signature. Kitty found the team that William Jennings Bryan requested and delivered them herself.
Kitty was constantly on the road selling. When she traveled, she took Idaho with her.
Kitty always spoke about the freedom and the independence that she had as a woman of the American West. She spoke about the vast open spaces and the blue sky and the sunshine of southern Idaho. And she carried this love of the landscape with her across the country.
The newspapers couldn't get enough. Kitty Wilkins was quickly becoming the modern-day equivalent of a media sensation. Hundreds of stories about the Horse Queen of Idaho continued to run in newspapers coast to coast. And Kitty brilliantly controlled the narrative.
There is this true mystery, in the East about what's happening in the West. And the images they have are things like women sharpshooters, but you don't see the woman in her long skirts going to the church social and making this proper Victorian world in the West. I think she said, we are making this wild place just like the East. We're not any less than you.
Back east in 1896, the same year Idaho granted women the right to vote, a young man named Henry Ford introduced a new technology called the quadricycle. Perhaps fittingly, the contraption could only move in one direction, forward. They called his invention the horseless carriage. It was the turn of the 20th century, a time of breathtaking change in America.
If you're born before the Civil War and you die after, the 20s, you've witnessed a massive industrial shift in the U.S. So the U.S. becomes more urban, more educated. It's a dramatic change. Transportation is transformed.
Change was coming, but the automobile would not totally eclipse horses until after the Great Depression. In the meantime, Kitty continued to set records with her horse sales. In 1900, she filled an order for 8,000 horses for a buyer in Kansas who sent them to South Africa for the Boer War. It was the largest horse sale in U.S. history. A young woman from Idaho was having an impact on world events.
Talk about Idaho's significance internationally. The Wilkins Horse Company supplied whole train loads of horses. Newspaper readers across the country knew where Mountain Home, Idaho was and could point to it on a map because Kitty Wilkins helped to make that famous.
But the press, initially fascinated with Kitty, began trying to tame her.
At some point, the newspaper reporters tried to domesticate Kitty. And so they tried to corral her by marrying her off and thereby put her back into the house, into the home, putting her back in her place.
Newspapers reported that Kitty was to marry a prominent St. Louis contractor.
And these newspapers humiliated Kitty Wilkins. The Idaho horse queen lassos a rich and handsome husband. The marriage never happened. Kitty could see that she was more powerful as a single woman. Kitty was no fool. She could see the world changing. She gave one of her last newspaper interviews to the Denver Post in 1902, and she said that horses, as intelligent creatures, were just as ready to meet an emergency as you were, which was impossible behind the wheel of a car.
One of Kitty's last and largest sales was to equip the United States military with horses to fight World War I. But after 1920, large horse markets declined to levels not seen in 6 decades. In the shadow of the Great Depression, Kitty retired to Glens Ferry, to a stately home near the Snake River. She rode well into her last decade and made appearances publicly a few times, honored with cheering crowds at parades and events. In the fall of 1936, just weeks after the death of her brother and partner John, Kitty's heart failed. She was 79 years old. Her grave lies next to family members in the Mountain View Cemetery in Mountain Home. The remarkable businesswoman who had made a name for herself and Idaho on an international scale died owing money to the local grocery store and power company.
She seemed to have died in poverty because she spent the end of her life giving so much of her money away to charity. Kitty spent her last years exercising her generous nature. How would we ever feel sorry for anyone who ended their life in that way?
Kitty C. Wilkins and May Arkwright Hutton were two very different Idahoans who lived extraordinary lives.
I think there's been an uptick in sharing these unusual stories about women, but I think that's the problem, is that we still think of them as unusual. We think of them as inspirational. We don't consider them a part of the rich fabric of the West. We consider them as sort of these bizarre outlier tales. So I think it's really important to make it more of an inclusive history.
Two bold and strong women embraced the freedom they found in Idaho. One rode her fortunes on silver in the mountains of the north. The other surrounded herself with diamonds in the desert. Both took life by the reins and lived it on their own terms.
I admire Kitty most for living the life that her conscience told her to live. And that was a life of independence. She called life in Idaho the most independent life on earth.